So earlier this week, the New York Times framed Threads as a Twitter killer. It's saying that basically Threads is performing so well right now as a text-based app that it's replacing it's filled the gap that Twitter used to occupy in terms of audience, and it certainly does. Like Meta announced that it has 500 million monthly active users as of June 16th, and it tied the growth to communities like book threads and basketball threads and parenting threads and music threads, which actually is kind of interesting because it is actually a little bit more like Reddit in the way it
Mm.
builds communities around topics compared to Twitter, which continue to rely on kind of breaking news. Like Twitter
Mhm.
back in the day was where you could follow news around major weather events and things like that. And Threads has not quite done that. It's more community-based entertainment, and it reacts to things in a similar way. But it is the biggest text-based sort of micro-blogging platform. It is interesting too that like Threads had one of the biggest launch ramps that any social app has ever created because it didn't have to build its social presence from
Mhm.
scratch. Users could arrive with their LinkedIn. Sorry, users could arrive with their Instagram linked identity or their Facebook account and already have like a familiar profile and a path to familiar people, which kind of solved the cold start problem that, say, Blue Sky and other platforms have not quite accomplished. So I would argue that Blue Sky behaves more like Twitter used to, and a lot of journalists have flocked from Twitter over to Blue Sky, and the audience there kind of reflects that ethos. The Reddit comparison is pretty useful. Threads has become this less real-time ticker and more of this interest-based community platform. People gather around entertainment and sports and fandoms and hobbies and like K-pop and the WNBA and books and dating, and I said parenting already. I would also propose that it has a little bit of Pinterest to it, not because of
Hmm.
the image format, but because the content categories that seem to work on Threads overlap strongly with Pinterest's world, like books and beauty and food and home and fashion and travel and hobbies and wellness and even quality video and photos in some cases. So, Pinterest organizes those categories around ideas and inspiration and intent, and then Threads organizes many of the same categories around conversation and identity. In my experience, it has been kind of a Reddit Pinterest hybrid, but with the microblogging of Twitter.
Yeah, that's interesting because it was always like meant to be this whole like Twitter killer, right?
Mhm.
But it never seemed to want to own the space entirely, right? Like, Twitter was always more of like the breaking news app, right? It's like you went there, you knew that journalists were going to be telling you everything that was happening. And Threads never really seemed that. Like, it seemed like as if you could come back and just like, dally and like post every so often. Whereas with Twitter, it seemed like if you wanted to be part of the conversation, you had to be in the conversation as it was happening. So it really hasn't fit that role, but it's
Mhm.
also never wanted to, right? I mean, Facebook and Instagram have previously both faced, controversy over their political, involvement.
Mhm.
um, for previous elections, particularly here in America. So I think it was intentional that they didn't want to become like the breaking news source. But I think that has kind of hindered their ability to be more in the conversation the way that Twitter
Mhm.
still, I feel like Twitter still remains that, even though, yeah, not everybody has come back. Even though it does seem as if it's having a bit of a resurgence. But even back at like peak days, I feel like it didn't have this many, like users, right? You had its smaller communities of like who were, speaking there, like, when we had marketing Twitter and like, the folks that were there, like, talking. But I'm sure that Threads has an easier time getting brands to come, create ads there because like Twitter, very famously doesn't do that very well, A, and then B, because of its political nature, a lot of brands
It's not
aren't.
always a brand safe environment,
Right,
right?
it's not a place that, like, brands are,
Mhm.
like, secure in wanting to put their money there. So that's another thing. So it does feel as if it's, like, they've kind of diverged a little bit, and it's, Threads has just kind of become its own thing, which is
Yeah.
interesting, and kinda cool, good for them.
It strikes me that it was trying to solve for something that Twitter did try to do. Like
Mhm.
when we were on Twitter and in its heyday, we were part of quote unquote marketing Twitter, right?
Okay.
Which was a community of people who communicated primarily on Twitter about marketing stuff.
Mhm.
And like that's where I ran Adweek chat and things like that.
Mhm.
That's where we ended up meeting and enjoying some of the friends that we still talk to in the marketing space. But the platform did not make it super easy to find all of that in one place. And that seems
Mhm.
to be what Threads was trying to solve for, right? What by creating these communities that are branded by posting to book threads, I can find people who I know are interested in book news and updates about books and discourse about books and things like that. And this is kind of the point of the New York Times story is that by doing so, it has become more Reddit-like because those operate sort of like subreddits, which I don't know if I can agree completely with that because of the way people interact with Reddit versus the way they interact with Threads, but I do think it is definitely its own thing, and it doesn't strike me as a replacement for Twitter now.
You know what this is making me think is that,
Hmm.
is it gonna be a replacement for Facebook? I would be curious how Facebook sees, its Facebook audience versus its Thread audience, and whether Threads will eventually eat Facebook, because people just aren't participating on Facebook the way that they used to, or the way that Facebook would like.
Mhm.
And if Threads becomes like the place that people do that, because I feel like Instagram is becoming more of the place of like you're sharing photos and you're trying to like be more with like the people that you actually follow, whereas like Threads is like the more of the I know the people, but I'm more inclined to follow people that I don't know. And so
Mhm.
where's the space for Facebook in that, because it doesn't fill any of those things anymore. And the more that they're encouraging people to do text-based posting, that would alternately be put on Facebook instead, makes me think that like Threads might eventually eat Facebook, especially because it's not actually doing what Twitter does anymore, and it is becoming more of a like community space and like finding people to follow. And if they're having talks about that internally at like
Mm.
Meta as they're figuring out what each of the platforms are meant to do.
Well, I think the short answer to that is can Meta create a gigantic Franken platform with lots of different features and that tries to do lots of different things? Absolutely. It's done that 3 times.
Yeah.
But right now, Threads is still like it's one of the ones that hasn't introduced quite as many features upon features upon features. And it does have, I mean, this is totally anecdotal, but it strikes me that Instagram and Threads have slightly less cultural controversy attached to them than Facebook, which is
Oh,
often
totally.
synonymous with some of the PR problems they've had in the past.
Sure. I mean, they're making a whole movie about it
Yeah,
again, you
they're
know?
selling books about it and all of the above,
Exactly.
you know, you and I know very well that Meta is the responsible party for all of those platforms, but, you
Mhm.
know, does your grandma know that when she's choosing her social media platforms, you know?
Well, totally, but grandma
Mhm.
is eventually gonna die. And basically, I guess my question is, when young people are signing up for social accounts, are they still signing up for Facebook? Or are they now optimizing for Instagram and Threads instead because they still see the value in those? Um, and is Facebook gonna continue being, like, a place that, they go? Because, I
Yeah.
mean, the more that we hear is that it sounds as if young people are completely skipping over Facebook, because it's like, it's not my audience, it's not where I care to see people, it's not, I never post, and I feel like it's, if they're starting to die down on, like, who them actually using, Facebook, and then it's all just, the older people that eventually are, gonna pass away, because I mean that's life,
Mhm.
then like, are we gonna see more growth in Threads, because it is offering something different. And Instagram, I feel like, will continue growing because that's mostly still like the number one image based social network, right? None of them have even gotten close to that. Instagram still seems to be, innovating enough to create, new, they've done reels, they're doing, I'm sure they'll do some serialized, content soon, right? Because that's an obvious thing of them copying, Snapchat and TikTok and what they're doing.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of growth there for, Instagram to continue. There does seem like a lot of more growth that could be happening on Threads. I just wonder, yeah, where the future is for Facebook. Like, what else could they be doing? That's
Yeah.
not just like I'm reposting what I'm posting on Instagram onto Facebook.
Yeah.
Um,
And for me,
but
it's
yeah,
like the place to keep up with my elderly relatives. That's like end of thought.
yeah, 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 exactly. I mean, yeah, that's pretty much for me too. I don't like actively use it anymore for
Mhm.
anything. But after reading this, I'm like, maybe I should be paying more attention to threads because, like, I joined when it first came out, but I haven't really like kept up with it. And I'm
Mhm.
like, hearing you talk about, I'm like, oh, maybe I do just go and start trying to like post more about the stuff that I am posting on Twitter.
It is,
Um,
generally speaking, a relatively brand safe platform, so I mean, it's certainly something to watch.
yeah, 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 for sure.
Mhm.
Cool.
So, I would say, is Threads really killing Twitter? And it
Yeah.
it may be killing one version of Twitter. It's probably not replacing every function Twitter served. It's certainly not serving the function that Twitter does of being, sort of the controversial hotbed that it continues to be. And Twitter used to do a bunch of jobs at once. It was breaking news, media chatter, political combat, sports reactions, academic exchange, it was comedy, it was customer service, it was fandom, it was brand voice, and now those jobs are split across platforms, right? Like X still has its news and politics, Blue Sky has a lot of the old media and academic culture, Threads has scale and interest communities, Reddit has expertise and search value, especially with AI search, and then LinkedIn has, of course, its like professional identity. So the Twitter killer label, I think, is probably too simple. I mean, that was the point of that story. But I think boiling it down to just being like Reddit is a little reductive.
Hmm.
Um, it's Threads is has a little Reddit, has a little Pinterest, has a little Instagram, and it has room for aspiration and hobbies and beauty and books and food and for brands to participate in those things too, as long as they do it in a community safe way. And then it also has it has some creator appeal and visual culture audience as well. So people who don't necessarily like the image and video forward format of Instagram have a place to play a little bit more as creators. But I think for brands, posting like it is X with different lighting isn't quite the same. It's not it's a different project, if it's a different product and it's a different audience. So once again, we have to specialize our content to the platform. My read is that Threads is a legit platform now. I mean, that's not a
Yep.
controversial statement, but the Twitter killer framing kind of hides and the Reddit comparison kind of hides the more interesting story, and that it's drifted away from the anger and news rhythm of X and toward communities that look more like different interest categories. And for brands, I think the opportunity is less about hot takes and more about recurring participation and treating it like a content creation platform more likely, because they have an opportunity to connect with fandom and taste and routine and in a way that users perceive to be safe.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So, lesson for me is that Threads and X are not the same product anymore. So now you do have to create content for each channel. You have to figure out like what's working for Twitter and what's working for Threads for you, right? And then also start thinking about like, is it worth you doing both channels, right? Like maybe you don't have to do Twitter if that's not where your audience is. Maybe it's enough now to move over to Threads that has more of those like interest categories and like audiences that you can just go direct to. Make sure that the channel you're actually using is good for what you're doing it for. This also means like if you're using Twitter and like Threads as like interchangeable like platforms for you to post the same thing, it's not going to be
Mm.
doing as well, right? Like now you have to create Twitter and like thread specific content. I think one of the examples that became very obvious for this recently was the Artemis 2 launch because it came out that like NASA had one person doing like threads. So it's like she owned that entire channel and like grew it to like what it was. I mean, I think Rachel Carton wrote about it, just showing that like, threads is like a legit platform now. So, something for brands to think about there is like whether you're using it to the utmost that it could be. The other thing here too is that, the organic reach dynamics are genuinely different. Threads surfaces content to non-followers, and X favors established accounts. So you could presumably build up a Threads account, from zero pretty quickly if you're posting regularly and like content that is specific to that audience there.
The format is really distinct too. It lives up to its name. Brands
Mhm.
and creators who and writers, etc., who use the threaded narrative format do a lot better on Threads than they often did in the past on Twitter. I know there are plenty of exceptions to that, but after various changes at Twitter, sometimes like a long thread became a little bit unwieldy and
Mhm.
Threads handles it a lot better. So playing into that stylistic choice is a good way to start using the platform in the way that it was intended.
Takeaways from this whole thing is just figuring out where you want your brand to land
Mhm.
when it comes to jumping in on events like with the World Cup and Taylor Swift and Travis Kelsey getting married. Is that an actual opportunity for you, or are you just trying to get attention for a thing that doesn't make sense for your brand? Similar here with the conversation between Twitter and Threads, like really considering whether it's an actual opportunity for you and a channel that's gonna like, be good for you. Similar again to like the TikTok, serialized content. Like, is that an actual thing that you should be spending time on and learning? There seems to be more and more avenues and channels for you to like jump on in terms of marketing. You really have to like choose the ones that like make sense for you, because otherwise you could just be running around with like a chicken with your head cut off because you want to participate in everything and not really figuring out what the voice of your brand is and what makes sense. And I think that like trying to like participate in everything removes you from like your audience, because they're like, should you really be involved in this conversation, or should you just kind of like ignore it and like speak to your audience? So really figuring out what your audience expects from you, but then like where you want to take your audience with you. I think it's like brands should be thinking about their audiences as like uh people that you take along with you on their journey and invite them into how your brand reacts to like cultural moments, yes, but then like the channels that you're on as well. And trying to do everything will waste a lot of money and time, but then also end up losing you the audience that like really believes you don't need to be doing that in the first place.
Excellent. I love it. And I would just add that adding value, I mean, this is not a new take by any means, but I do think it's escalating. Like adding
Mhm.
value and not just noise continues to be a major challenge for brands across social platforms that can be in these like serialized video or film drama formats. It's filling a gap that Hollywood is having trouble filling, and it's filling a gap that people are seeking in social media spaces. But to create quality content and to do so meaningfully in a way that does not damage your brand is it's hard. It's hard. You have to put the work and creativity and effort into it. As brands continue to have more money than say existing creative studios, then brands can kind of step into those open spaces, but they're not going to help themselves if they don't put the same kind of creative effort and work into it that entertainment studios have in the past.
Yeah, another one, just piggybacking off of that, is
Mhm.
this whole idea of like discernment and like taste, where it's
Mhm.
like you have to be able to discern whether like you should participate in these things. Okay, tying it back to the Taylor Swift and Travis Kelsey wedding, the fact that you have so much money, she's billionaire, he's a millionaire, whatever, 100 millionaire, shows that like it's better for you to decide the things that like make sense for you and like the narrative that you're trying to push, instead of trying to have everything, right? You can try to do too much, invite a thousand people to your wedding and have it in like this like space to try to fit into that, instead of and have that go astray because you're trying to do too much instead of, sticking to like your values and the story that you're trying to put out and make it fit with those things, because it makes sense for that narrative that you are putting out. And your audience learns to expect things from you. And when you kind of, you know, go off on a tangent, people question what they feel your brand says about them. If that,
Absolutely.
yeah.